Good afternoon everyone and welcome to the Scotland Excel Procurement Week at the Academy with today's focus on social care. My name is Joyce Campbell and I'm the Category Manager for the Adult Social Care team at Scotland Excel, and I'll host the session for today. The session follows on from the Future Policy Direction session held earlier, but with a specific focus on fair work in social care and potential changes in policy going forward. I would like to welcome and introduce the panel speakers today. Andy Kerr is the chairperson of the Scottish Government Fair Work in Social Care Implementation Group. John Mooney is the regional organiser at Unison Scotland, and Rebecca Genovese is the team lead at Scottish Government Social Care Fair Work Policy Team, and Claire Thomas is a policy manager in COSLA. So as I said, following the presentations, there will be an opportunity for a 20-minute Q&A session. So the first speaker today is Andy Kerr, and Andy is going to present a 10-minute overview of the 2016 review, providing the background and vision to the Scottish Government Fair Work Implementation Group and the general direction of travel. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. Can I just check everybody can see the slides? Has that worked?
Yeah.
Yes. It has. Okay, sorry, that's fine. So, good afternoon, colleagues. First of all, I could start with a thank you. I know that a lot of you have been working hard on behalf of the workforce in social care for many years, but in particular this year and last year, and making things like the real living wage happen quicker and more effectively, and we really appreciate your cooperation in that. So my session is largely about some background. I wasn't a member of the convention, but actually the work that I'm doing on behalf of COSLA and the Scottish Government is the doing bit, as I would say, of the work that they've been involved in. So where does it come from? It comes from the discussions with the trade unions at a Scottish Government level, the Working Together Review, the establishment of the Fair Work Convention, and a variety of reports which have been around for a wee while now. And certainly our ambition as the Fair Work and Social Care Group is to actually bring those reports to life and make things happen, build confidence and surety in the fact that we're making strides along the lines of fair work. I'm going to go quite quick. You'll get the slides. But what I'm trying to do in this session is very quickly just trying to explain to you, this is not just about pay and conditions. This is about economic recovery. It's about well-being. It's about health. It's also about pay, and it's also about conditions, and it's also about people's lives at work. And certainly the dimensions of fair work are designed to achieve that. So there's going to be a lot of text in the slides. Be warned, I'm going to just try and get a flavour of this across to you, because I think it's important that when we talk later on through John, Claire and Rebecca, we're trying to bring to life some of these big, high value, high ticket items. So I like to start with this slide, and again, there's a lot on it. But if you look at the last item there, providing societal outcomes about health and well-being, inclusive growth, prosperity. You know, this is, as I say, it's a big subject.
We can't see your slides. Have you taken them back down again?
No, I did not. That's weird. Hold on a second. I just moved on, to be honest. The slide, did it disappear after that?
Yeah, it did.
I'll try that again. So, apologies, colleagues. Don't know what's going on there. Nope, still not back.
No.
Okay, I don't know. Rebecca's got a copy of these slides. Rebecca, if you don't mind, I will just talk. I know that that's probably not the best way to do this, but the slides will be available after the presentation. So really what I was trying to describe there, this is part of a more societal function, fair work. It's a culture, an ethos, a set of values, but also tangibles in terms of people's life at work and the conditions at work. And the implementation group has been trying to, as I say, bring this to life and make it happen. And I think that's our important task. So as I said earlier on, there's 5 dimensions. Effective voice, it is what it says on the tin. It's about how does the workforce become engaged. Nothing about me without me, that sort of idea. So it's about views are sought and listened to, safe environment for dialogue, not just a channel of communications, reciprocal, respectful, and an interest in all things that the employer does. And how do we see that being played out? We see that being played out in terms of trade union recognition, collective bargaining, involvement in work groups in your workplace, communication and consultation, and being involved integrally in the workforce, being listened to and being valued. And again, a big part of fair work is the feeling of the workforce. It's the engagement of the workforce, and we all have this in their own working lives as well. And the more power and influence you have in your own role, the better you are in terms of your own mental health and well-being, but also the contribution you make in terms of innovation and change. So we certainly see effective voice, and as I say, Rebecca will pick up the theme of this later on, as a big key area for us. In terms of opportunity, it's about making sure that you can access progress in the work environment, that you can make change happen for yourself by your own investment in your own human capital and how you develop yourself, but also big basic points around recruitment, retention and development being open to all and people taking part in that. So again, effective voice is one aspect, but also as part of that effective voice and part of that workforce experience is the opportunity to improve yourself. So we're looking at what barriers exist to that, how do we engage with groups who are disconnected from this area, who are disengaged, perhaps diverse groups, different local communities, and the qualities profile and training. How does all that make sure that we're improving the opportunity at work for all of us? And a big issue, and these, particularly over recent times, and I would argue very soon when things like the coronavirus job retention scheme come to an end, is security. So the third dimension of fair work is security. And that's the idea that people feel safe at work. And as we all know from, if you're in psychology classes, year one, Hertzberg's principles, the idea of feeling secure is a real big issue for us in our own workplaces, in our own environment, but obviously particularly for quite a challenged workforce. It's not a pretty picture here and there in parts of the social care workforce, and we want to make sure that fair work principle around security of employment, predictability of hours, predictability of pay, these are, as it says in the report, foundations of a successful life as well as a successful work life. So again, we want to make sure that insecurity is removed. Fitting alongside that is fulfillment, that work should be a fulfilling experience. You're using your skills, you should have empowerment, scope control, creative, happy, and we want to make that work in every part of our workforce and whatever workforce we're involved in, but particularly in social care, where we want to ensure that we have a stable workforce, a growing workforce, that we retain our workforce, and that's a really big part of that. So again, in rounds of improving fulfillment, job design, dialogue, effective voice, involvement of trade unions, lots of big issues involved in there. And lastly, in terms of the dimensions, is respect. So again, it's about, and I think they all fit together in terms of being treated respectfully at work, the two-way process, mutual respect, health and safety and well-being of others. It's a social exchange being at work. And as we compete for labour in a very tight environment, and that's going to happen more fully, then of course this becomes an incredibly important part of the fair work dimension. So again, we want to see change in that process. So I'm now onto my last virtual slide that no one's been able to see. My apologies for that, but again, you'll have them available to you. Is what do we do about that? So certainly the group got together. It's a big stakeholding group. It's got GMB, it's got Unite, it's got the RCN, it's got Unison, it's got the provider organisation, CCPS, it's got Scottish Care, it's got professional bodies. Joyce is one of our members and key players, as is Claire. It's got COSLA, finance directors, all the right people around the room. And our job is to try and get through this. And there's a great quote from one of our COSLA colleagues, which says, if this was easy, somebody would have done it by now. And that's been our watchword. And it is complex. You will understand probably more than I the complexities of this. So we want to make sure that we work with you as we try and unroll and unfold and develop fair work into the workplace and social care. So what do we recognise? We need to go on and do this. We support national collective bargaining. We support the idea of minimum pay and terms and conditions, recognising the role of trade unions. Commissioning doesn't work. That's a foundation principle of both the Fair Work Convention report, but also FEELE in its report too. We look to the National Care Home Contract, which will be familiar with obviously a lot of people at this event. Role of national commissioning, ethical commissioning, regulation of fair work, training and skills. What about the National Care Service? So lots of big issues around the whole fair work agenda. So on that basis, we said we just need to get something to do right now to build faith and something that we can pick off and do that'll have meaningful impact. And Rebecca will cover those, but that was around the real living wage, its implementation and its support and its scope. It's around the issue of terms and conditions and 0-hour contracts, and it's about effective voice. And we set up some work streams supported fantastically by so many people in this call, but others outside the call and outside this meeting, working really hard over the last 3 months, every week on a Tuesday afternoon. I can hear them groaning already at those meetings we had that Tuesday afternoon, but we really achieved a hell of a lot, and I'm very pleased with the report. The report's now with COSLA for the leaders group, and it's with the Minister for consideration. I will stop there. That was my fairly quick run through of the Fair Work dimensions, and I'll pass over to John.
Thanks, Andy. So hopefully you can see my slides.
Yep, can see them okay.
Yes.
Yeah, forgot them. Yeah, that's good news. If for no other reason, you don't need to look at me while I'm speaking. So, hello folks, my name is John Mooney. As you can see, I'm a regional organiser with Unison Scotland. My slides, unlike Andy's, aren't very detailed. I'm afraid you'll need to listen closely to find out all the interesting stuff I've got to say. So, as you can see, the headline thing for us is care work needs fair work. First of all, we wanted to look at who benefits from a fair work approach to care. You know, and as a trade union, our focus is on the rights and experiences of staff at work. So fair work's understandably a massive issue for us in that regard. However, what we recognise is that the needs and preferences of people who access care and support depend on the support of workers. And as such, those needs and preferences, in our view, can never be met by a low-paid, impoverished, micromanaged, untrained, insecure, over-regulated workforce deployed in unsafe and discriminatory working conditions. You know, for us, there can be no fair care without fair work. The people who access care deserve to be supported by professional, happy, secure, highly trained staff who can support them to enjoy the fullest life that they can. And social care staff have been undervalued by society in general for many years. You know, this won't be news to anyone. You know, there's been low wages, job insecurity, and a general lack of power, which is the effective voice that, you know, you've already heard about from Andy, has led to a beaten down workforce in some areas. And we believe that fair work has the potential to transform the sector. You know, for us, if we get the integration of fair work into social care right, we can ensure that care can become an attractive career prospect for the people of Scotland. And it's not just the people who receive the support and the staff who are directly providing the support, but we think employers can benefit in many ways too. You know, a happy workforce reduces turnover, which improves service delivery and drives down costs linked to recruitment and improves the chances of retaining contracts. A levelling up of workers' rights and conditions at work also reduces the chances of undercutting in the procurement process, for example. You know, so what is required to deliver fair work? And there's obviously lots of things that are required to deliver fair work, but we wanted to focus on these particular parts. Ethical commissioning is a big issue for us. You know, currently, power in social care rests with funders and commissioners. This is recognised and understood to be the case in many areas of central and local government procurement too. However, the average person in the street may be surprised to learn that their relatives' care is also overseen by shareholders, investment trusts and shell companies. In many cases, as exposed by the pandemic, processes are prioritised along with price and profit over people, human relations and human rights. Fair work standards can help to transfer the power away from the financial machinery by ensuring that workers' rights come before profit. Unison would like to see the complete removal of for-profit care in Scotland, but in the absence of this, a balancing of the power in workers' favour is essential. In terms of sectoral bargaining, to truly deliver fair work for social care workers, we believe that this is essential. Collective agreements with trade unions over minimum rates of pay, holidays, pension rights, sick leave and other conditions are the essential requirements that other workers in the public sector take for granted, and these should be extended to our social care workers as well. The key component in all of this is effective voice. You know, it's the key factor that binds every other aspect of fair work and social care together. For too long, workers have been ignored on issues like understaffing, paying conditions, how their workplace should function. And staff need a truly independent say in their working lives and the ability to speak out on issues that will not result in problems for them. These are the only things that will deliver a true effective voice for workers, and that is what Unison and our sister trade unions are able to deliver. It's ironic that even now we have employer and commissioner groups talking about what delivers an effective voice for workers through setting up structures as they see fit. You know, the balance of power remains firmly on the employer's side in this scenario and is wildly different from workers' experiences in local government or NHS, for example, where very similar jobs are carried out. And for some employers, the involvement of trade unions will be uncharted territory, but there's evidence that our involvement is a positive one. As well as the bargaining and representation aspects of our role, which I think most people who don't deal with trade unions would at least envisage as something that we do, we also provide access to further learning for staff members through union learning funds. Union workplaces are safer due to specialised health and safety training that members can attend and take part in. And studies also show there's a higher level of innovation amongst employees in unionised workplaces. As mentioned earlier, there's much less staff turnover, and in general, it tends to push up standards. So we spoke, Andy spoke a bit about the work streams earlier, and what do we want to see delivered from a trade union point of view. I think what I would say firstly is the discussions in the three work streams have been very positive and will, if accepted, undoubtedly move Fair Work and Care forward. For payment of the real living wage, we want to see a transparent and speedy process that results in funding that allows providers to pay all staff, not just direct carers, the real living wage and still maintain pay differentials with other staff groups such as team leaders. For the terms and conditions, in short, we want to see parity with local government or NHS staff in terms of the issues like annual leave, sick leave, pensions, maternity or paternity pay. And we also want to see a common sense approach on 0 hours that gives the worker a genuine choice around having a contract with enough hours to earn a meaningful wage. And for effective voice, we want to see trade union involvement at all levels of social care, empowering members to improve their working lives based on what they experience whilst at work. I think in regards to the work that's being done with Fair Work and social care, we have the opportunity for a new beginning, and we've come too far to fail now. Thanks, folks. I'm happy to hand over now.
Thanks, John. And that was a really insightful presentation and highlighting the benefits and the importance of effective voice and the ongoing journey for fair work in the care sector, particularly from a Unison perspective. The third presenter today is Rebecca Genovese. Rebecca will present a 5-minute overview of the 3 main work streams of the Scottish Government Fair Work implementation groups that Andy mentioned earlier on. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks, Joyce. I'm just pulling up some slides now. If you can give me a little shout when they are up. And can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, slides are up as well.
Perfect, thanks all. And hi everyone, it's great to be here with you today. So as Joyce says, my name's Rebecca and I am a policy team leader at Scottish Government with a focus on fair work in the social care workforce. And as you've heard from Andy and John and Joyce and many other speakers, I'm sure across the various sessions that have happened today, fair work for me is real transformational power to change things for the better for the workforce and obviously its service users and everybody involved in the system. So following on from the conversations that you've just heard, I'd like to just take a few minutes now to tell you a little bit about the work done to date, as Joyce has outlined. So in short, I should probably just say that the Fair Work and Social Care Implementation Group was given some quick actions, I guess, to take forward, and that was to progress some key themes that would have meaningful impact to the social care workforce. So as you can see from the slide and that you've heard already, is a broad membership group representing diverse sector experience and needs, and there's been a significant investment from everybody that's been involved in that, so a massive thanks to everybody who's freely given up their time and expertise to get us to where we are today. Within that, the group have focused on 3 key workstream areas. So the first one, as kind of has been outlined by Andy and John, is about the real living wage, and that was really about making sure that this year's implementation for 2020 2021 was delivered, so that there was no delay to workforce, and that ended up being delivered via a national approach. And there'll be many people on the call today that have a hand in making sure that there wasn't a delay in the workforce receiving their uplift, which has been well received, so thank you. One of the other elements of that work stream was to consider the scope and value of real living wage policy for future years, and I'll come on to talk about that in just a second. The second work stream then was around introducing or making some recommendations about the introduction of minimum terms and conditions and how we can end the misuse of zero-hour contracts. And the final one, which has been talked quite a bit about today already, is about effective voice. And that was about minimum standards, frameworks, and recommending what that would look like to enable effective voice at a local level. So just in terms of where the group have got, and I won't read these bullets out word for word, but just starting off with real living wage, the first thing to say is that the main priority has actually been delivered. It is now in flight, so people have already received the uplift or are about to across the remainder of this month. What the Fair Work and Social Care group did as well was to consider the scope and value question. So actually recognising that, John's point about it's previously been those in direct care that have had access to that uplift, there's been a recommendation to consider who is eligible for that, and that is now sitting with COSLA leaders and ministers. In terms of the questions around scope, we explored conversations around differentials and what the albeit positive policy, the unintended consequence of that and the impact that that has had on the workforce, both in terms of pay and also that kind of feeling of being valued. So the feedback and the experience from the groups have been incorporated and with some strong recommendations now sitting with COSLA leaders and ministers to consider as to what that would look like moving forward over the next couple of years. There's currently also a real living wage policy review underway at the moment, and that's currently supported by Scottish Government and COSLA, looping in with members with the expertise in the Fair Work and Social Care group, and their feedback, experience and thoughts will be considered as part of that policy development. So all in all, real strong progress being made on work stream 1. In terms of terms and conditions, as John's already outlined, we have reviewed the conditions that sat within local authority, third, private sector and NHS. And there's been a real focus and determination to achieve parity, both in terms of terms and conditions and esteem. So there was a number of conversations around the minimum standards and terms and conditions, and that has been identified into some priority ones that would be worth considering making some quick movement on. However, what is very, very clear is that it will be incredibly complex to make large-scale change on terms and conditions, knowing that there is not a single employer. So it is recommended that further work is done with experts in key areas such as pensions, maternity, paternity, and so on. So terms and conditions, really exciting place to be, and some ongoing conversations and work happening in that space. And finally, effective voice, as we've chatted about today. One of the things that came through in the group is that it's about skills and culture of an organisation as much as a mechanism. So it's not just about having one route to effective voice. Actually, there's multiple options to do that. But what is important is that the power is within the workforce and that they have got the opportunity to have their voice heard, and things change on the back of it. So the Fair Work and Social Care group have done a huge amount of work actually in all of these work streams, but in effective voice, what's happened is principles and markers for effective voice at a local level have been identified. So what do they look like? What should employees expect to see, feel and hear to know that they have effective voice? And from that, a minimum set of standards was developed and with identification of additional support that may be required to implement. Now the effective voice workstream actually reached out to the workforce and spoke to over 1,000 workers, either through surveys or focus groups, and a number of providers and employers as well have fed back into that. So all of the learnings from the direct contribution from the workforce have been fed in and considered as part of the minimum standards that have now been recommended. So that was a very, very brief overview in terms of some of the working conversations that have went on in these 3 work streams. But I'm going to quickly hand over to Andy to share what is going next and next steps for us.
Andy, you're on mute.
apologies. I hope that's not the first time this has happened during your conference, but I certainly did not do that very well there. So first of all, really picking up a point made by others, including John, we've got a lot more to do around this, but actually the achievement of our interim objectives are hugely beneficial, hugely significant. There'll be markers, there'll be a statement of intent, there'll be actual value to the workforce, but it will show that there's action being taken and there's value being placed in the work around fair work. Of course, as we started our journey back in February 2020, the Feely Review had not been invented and not been thought about at that stage, but actually it came as part of our work. So we want to work with that review because Derek Feely came to the conclusion that fair work is an essential part of going forward in terms of social care, but also recognise that the commissioning system, which you are all very interested in, needs to align with that intent. And at the moment, it's felt that that does not. And we want to deliver on our interim report, and that's the areas that we've all mentioned in terms of John and Rebecca so far. So we recognise we've got a lot to do, but we should hold on to the success that we've had to date and make sure that's delivered. And the last slide, I think, shows you my view on all of this. You know, we are on the path towards the foothills of fair work. There's a lot more to be done, and I think that sits well next to Nicola from COSLA's quote about if it was that easy, it'd have been done by now. So we know there's a lot more work to do, and we look for your support in doing so. Thanks very much.
That's great, Andy. Thank you for that, and thanks, Rebecca, for providing a whistle-stop tour of the work streams and the achievements today, and for Andy outlining the next steps. There is certainly there has been a significant amount of work being achieved over the last couple of months, with the commitment, as Andy says, of a number of individuals. And going forward, certainly there's much more work to be done to climb that mountain, as to speak. So finally, we're going to hear from Claire Thomas. Claire is a policy manager from COSLA. Claire will cover a 5-minute overview from a local government perspective and what we need to do going forward. So I'll hand over to you, Claire. Thanks.
Great, thanks Joyce, and hello to everybody. So from a local government perspective, fair work is absolutely a priority, and the role of local government in driving fair work, both as an employer and a commissioner of service, is outlined in the National Performance Framework. Fair work and social care is defined by the Fair Work Convention as a priority for COSLA's elected members, and they mandated officers to support the work outlined through the Fair Work and Social Care Group that Rebecca and Andy and John have given you an overview of. This work was jointly commissioned by the Cabinet Secretary at the time, Ms Freeman, and Councillor Curry, who's our COSLA spokesperson for health and social care. The work was also heavily supported by professional advisors in local government, so they were from finance, from HR and from commissioning, and they provided valuable input into the discussions through the 3 work streams alongside Scotland Excel. Rebecca's outlined some of the discussions that took place in the working groups, and some of these have been really challenging, and at times there has been a variation of views from the different members represented on the group. However, we have been able to work together to produce a report that will go to ministers and COSLA leaders at the end of June, and that will set out a number of recommendations and options for moving forwards that's come from the discussion in the 3 work streams. So COSLA leaders will be asked at the end of June to continue to support the work that needs to be undertaken to implement the recommendations. But as Andy and Rebecca and John have set out, that the implementation phase of any recommendation that's agreed by Scottish Government and COSLA will undoubtedly be the most challenging part, and we'll continue to rely on our professional advisors to support this. And we may need wider input from other experts, particularly in relation to the kind of commissioning and procurement elements. One of the mechanisms that we use to do this, that I certainly utilise, is through the Social Work Scotland Commissioning and Procurement Network. And I know a number of you from that really useful forum. I should say that I don't have a background in commissioning and procurement, so that engagement for me, as well as with colleagues in Scotland Excel, is really crucial. But we'll also need further engagement with procurement networks and through SOLAR for the legal input. Some of the challenges that have been raised by local government advisors have been in relation to the impact on the local government workforce, as the scope of the Fair Work and Social Care Group is for all sectors. Therefore, the impact of these are across the whole local government workforce, because obviously terms and conditions kind of apply to that organisational element. One of the other important elements with the recommendations that are taken forward is ensuring that they're fully funded and that there's sustainable funding to allow for implementation. And it will probably come as no surprise to you that that's really a key priority for COSLA leaders. Although we had input from commissioners to the work, much of the focus was really on the recommendations, understandably so. And as Andy's outlined, the next steps are the really critical part of the work, and we need to pull together the experts in the system to look at how we do this and consider any unintended consequences as well. At the session that we had earlier on the draft ethical commissioning principles, there was pretty overwhelming support for including fair work as one of these key principles. However, there was a challenge raised about whether this is an effective lever as it could be when there's no legislation, employment laws reserved, and living wage and fair work isn't mandatory. So it's certainly a piece of work that we need to pick up. We're really keen to get any initial thoughts that you have on this today as well, and any input that you want to kind of flag to us just now. We know there's a real drive to do this work quickly, and rightly so, and to make the real and kind of meaningful change for the workforce. But it has been set out today as complex, and we need to make sure that we do this properly and get it right. I know that a number of you will be asked to provide your advice to your councillor leaders when they consider the paper and report at the end of the month. So I would really ask you to look out for this and provide your input to support that political decision-making process that allows us to move forwards with this area of work. Thanks.
Thanks, Claire, and for providing the local government perspective. It certainly highlights that there's obviously much work to be done to progress the Fair Work group going forward, but it's obviously promising again and to climb that mountain. I'm very aware of the time for the slot today. I think it's running to 3:15. So I'm now going to open for the Q&A session. And I'm just looking at the meeting chat just now. I mean, I think most comments that we've got at the moment is really just sort of comments rather than questions. We've got one from Eric Sutherland, who said they've recently reviewed care at home with the outcome regarding improved support structure, career progression, and social care and learning academy. Partner trade unions involved throughout, as John was saying how important that is, and probably the biggest thing we could have done in making a difference to child poverty, and hope it will have an impact on the gender pay gap. And that's certainly a lot of the discussions that were coming out of the work streams in the last couple of months that Andy and Rebecca has been leading on. We've got another comment here from Mary O'Toole. Mary's saying, agree with these points. Care workers are often in receipt of working tax credits, work several jobs, and need to uplift the bar on better pay and terms and conditions. I'm just looking to see, agree with points around poverty, and there also needs to be some exploration of how to encourage more males into the care field. I think, as Andy alluded to earlier as well, you know, the review has certainly brought up issues around commissioning procurement and how can we better align some of the work that we all do in our health and social care partnerships, but also in our corporate service areas as well in terms of procurement, and how can we actually, you know, tidy that up. We had a really interesting session earlier on about the light touch regime as well. You know, how can we actually make better use of that? And there's lots of guidance out there in terms of best practice, and, you know, are we really using it to the best? Is it that we really need a clean slate, or is it that we just need to have better education and better focus around some of the issues that's been raised today? I think one of the questions that I thought was quite interesting, Annie Gunnar-Logan had raised this morning, was around issues on 0 hour contracts. And I suppose, John, from a Unison perspective, you know, 0 hour contracts, obviously some staff actually enjoy the freedom that provides. But what would your perspective be on that from a Unison perspective?
Well, I think you're right to say that. I mean, we generally speak about 0 hour contracts as though they're a bad thing that should be eradicated, and generally that is our position, but they do suit some people. But the issue for us is that the people who are on 0-hour contracts need to genuinely wish to be on them. And the thing that we need to solve across the sector is how we ensure that the power actually lies with the staff. With the amount of hours that are given out across care and people working more than contracted hours and things like that, we believe that, generally speaking, there's enough hours to go around for everyone. But if you are looking to opt out, that has got to be your choice. It's not, it can't be under pressure from your manager or because you've no other option, So I totally take the point on board, but we think for the vast majority, giving them the chance to have a real meaningful income, most people would take that option.
Thanks, John. I see there Stephen Brannigan has posed a question to any of the panel. If you could make any big change tomorrow to have the biggest impact, what would it be? I think I might throw that one to Andy.
I think it's a brilliant question. I wish I'd thought of it in advance. I think it would be, for me, around the risk balance in procurement, because in the real world, as I see it, and as I've lived it for many years, the contracts that go into the system and they're done on a legitimate basis, or not just the system we have, it's almost like the risk is transferred not to the provider, because at the end of the provider will have to change the workforce. So if there's a risk of the work not being available or being changed at a short notice, or being so flexible that the worker doesn't have the chance to have 16 hours per week minimum or the contracted hours, essentially what happens is, through procurement, the provider then makes changes, which therefore impacts on the workforce. So for me, it's something about the procurement and commissioning system that gives more stability inside that. And my second wish will be that we have a recognised rate in the short term, because who knows where this is all going in the future, but a recognised rate in the short term that supports fair work, that encompasses the costs of doing what we want to do and gaining and reaping the societal benefit in terms of economic recovery, well-being for the individual, as well as better support for those we're looking to provide support to. So for me, it's all about the commissioning environment.
Thanks, Andy. We've got a question in from Stuart Calderwood for John. Do collective agreements commonly impose higher rates of pay than real living wage in the care sector or any other sector?
I mean, I think impose maybe isn't perhaps a word we would like to use, but generally speaking, yes, wages across the sector are higher whenever there is trade union bargaining in place. Across, for example, local government, the pay for social care type jobs is much higher than that in the third sector or private sector. In the third or private sector, where we have recognition and therefore we're achieving collective agreements, it really depends on the finances of the company. Some companies do pay more than that. Companies like Enable, for example, where we're able to look at the situation, discuss it together about how we get to a position, where we can make the work, fairer for the staff, and how it's sustainable for the employer as well. So it really depends, to be honest. But generally speaking, yeah, rates of pay are higher.
Thanks, John. And I think we've maybe got one final question from Rachel Mackay. And Rachel is saying, what is the panel's view on how fair work should be scored in tenders? I suppose from a panel point of view, I'm not sure whether or not they're steeped in the real procurement in terms of how tenders are scored. I suppose I would be interested to hear what other participants' view of that would be, rather than the panel itself. Unless, Jennifer, you have something that you might want to add on that one. Oh, is Jennifer there?
Claire's got her hand up. Joyce? Claire Thomas?
Yep.
Hi. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Joyce. I can't give a professional view on how Fair Work should be scored, but I suppose my reflections on some of the findings from the Independent Review of Adult Social Care report is that it doesn't recognise some of the really good practice that goes on in commissioning in local authorities, particularly in relation to Fair Work, where there is the sort of recognition of Fair Work conditions. And the sort of importance of including that as one of the kind of scoring tenders. But I suppose, you know, quality is always going to be one of the kind of overriding things that need to be incorporated within those tenders as well. But yeah, certainly from a COSLA perspective, I think some of the reflections in the independent review, not to say that further work doesn't need to be done, that we can do joint work together, but it doesn't quite recognise some of the really good things that are happening.
Thanks, Claire. And that's interesting because a lot of the tenders now that go out have a higher focus on quality and, you know, a lower focus on cost. And quite often we're looking at sustainability rather than the cheapest price. So I think I'll probably finish off there today. Any of the other things that have came up in the meeting chat we'll have a look at and see what we can get back out on the Academy. So I'd like to bring the session to a close. I would like to thank the panel for giving up their time today, and I hope that you have found it useful and worthwhile. Thank you for attending the Fair Work Principles in Social Care.